Welcome, everybody, to Today in Space. I am, as always, your space science podcast host from the East Coast, Alex G. Orfanos, and we're here to talk a little bit of tech, a little bit of business, and we have our guest, David Hirschfield. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me on, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for reaching out, and we're just like let's chat tech and business, and this is I love this stuff. The space stuff I'm super into, but I think most of my day is actually more around business and tech. So this is really fun. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are, what the company is, what you're doing, and then we can dive in from there.
Okay. I've been in the software industry for almost 35 years now. I started out in enterprise and then ended up in consulting in my early career and was project management for enterprise like Texas Instruments, Motorola, Intel, Allied Signal, Arizona Public Service. These are places that I was involved in project managing for a contracting group I was working with. And then I started my own software company, logistics, route distribution, inventory management. Um,
Which is no joke. Like if that goes wrong, it's that
oh, yeah,
business can't run. Yeah.
right. Especially when there's delivery and inventory and trucks and all that involved, right?
Yeah.
And multiple warehouses. Anyway, so we did this, and it started because a friend of my brother-in-law at the time had just gotten out of the military, and he wanted to go into business, and so he bought some vending machines. This is how the whole thing
Mm.
started. And he was looking, and he had 6 or 7 machines, and all the coins and the money and the inventory, and he was trying to figure out how to track all this stuff. And he went and looked for software, and back then it was all this expensive Unix stuff. You
Oh
needed
yeah.
servers, and there was nothing that would run on a PC, which Windows 3.1 had just come out. I mean, this is, the first version of Windows that was really usable. It
Yeah.
kind of made Windows happen, right?
Yeah.
So I said, well, why don't we? And so I was working at Texas Instruments at the time. So I said to my partner, why don't we are the guy I was working with, why don't we start a software company? Because I always wanted to do that. And I thought this was a good, and we had been talking about it. I said, let's build software for vending operators, right? And we could, just this sort of as just to kind of get our feet wet with a software company.
Mm.
We'll create software, we'll put some ads out the tabloids for that industry. And we'll start to get some customers and kind of have a little annuity going from this and learn a little bit about software business, famous last words. So anyway, and so despite, of course, nothing is that simple, but we started selling. And because it was on Windows and it was really available to a lot of these smaller vending operations,
Mm.
we got swamped at our first trade show.
Wow.
It was the funniest thing because we're in the back corner of this. These are big, and these are big trade shows because you have
Yeah.
all the big candy makers and soda companies, right? Then you have all the equipment manufacturers, and we had no idea it was going to be like that.
Wow.
And I'd been to big trade shows in the tech industry, but I just surprised me how big this was in the snack food industry. So it was massive. And we got in late, and we were like way buried in the back corner, a tiny little 10 by 10 booth. We even went to like Kinko's and got a banner that was made out of plastic, which had the name of our company, Vendmaster, and with when you use PVC pipe to push it out, so you could see it on both from either side of the aisle when you're
Yeah.
walking up and down. I mean, it was like so cheap, right? The whole thing was like, we weren't really trying to build a real company at the time. We didn't think we were anyway. And we were buried. We had lines out the booth because we were the first product on Windows that was like accessible to this mass of
Wow.
operators, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, that was the beginning of it. We didn't eat for 3 days lunch because we
Oh
couldn't
my
pause while we are doing demos. It was so funny that fire marshal came and told us you have to clear this out, and I said, talk to the people out there, we're doing demos.
God.
We actually got in trouble. So anyway, that company, despite everything we did, it grew to 800 customers in 22 countries, and we sold it to a publicly traded firm in 2000.
Wow.
So that was my first experience with
Oh
the
wow.
startup. And I thought I was, hot shit and I knew what I was doing. And I had no idea what I was VP of products for the company that bought us for the next 3 years until
Oh, interesting. Okay.
left there and then went out on my own again. And it was another few years before I decided to start Tekyz, and that was 17 years ago.
Mm,
So, but and then with Techies, I've worked with a lot of companies of different sizes, but especially a lot of startups. In the 85 or 86 startups at this point that we worked with, and
wow.
a couple of them were really successful. One of them, Broadway producer, built a product that is used to produce every single product now, every show on Broadway for the last 6 or 7 years,
Wow.
and the Olympic opening games and Winter Olympics. And I mean, every cruise line uses it for all their stage production. It's really very successful product. Tim Cook announced, did a video montage of 6 or 7 iPad products when he announced the iPad Air. I think that was 8 or 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And this was one of the products on that video montage. So
Wow.
had a couple customers like that, but the vast majority fail. And they all fail for the same reason. They fail because they lack product market fit. They wait
Mm,
way too long to get out in front of the customer with their product and ask them for money. That's basically the root of product market fit. People say, I love that. I'm definitely going to buy it when it comes out.
mhm.
And then when it comes out, you have really no idea if they're going to buy it or not. So until somebody's writing you a check consistently and enough numbers so that you can take a lifetime value of your customer versus what the cost is to acquire each one of those customers. And if you
Mm.
don't have a 3-to-1 ratio between those two numbers, you don't have a viable business.
It,
So,
it's really
yeah.
interesting, having worked in the tech industry for probably a decade. You said 35 years you've been in this. How has that changed? Because I can, for someone that's been in both the hype of working at a place like Apple Retail and then, working in 3D printing now, I've seen hype for sure. And it seems like there's always a bunch of people who are gung ho on saying, sure, let me know when it's out, we'll buy it, and
Right.
then they're they're just not to be seen after it comes
Right.
out. Um, is that something that has changed over the 35 years? Is that
No,
something that's just how people are?
that's just human nature. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where people say, oh, well, in fact, there is probably the best business book I've ever read. This is a little tip to everybody out there that ever thinks they want to, well, even if you're not going to start a company, it's just a really brilliant book.
Mm,
It's called The Mom Test.
the mom.
Um, and the reason it's called The Mom Test, the guy who wrote this book, I can't, I really got to look his name up. I keep forgetting who it is, but he's had several startups, very successful exits. And he basically says that everybody's going to lie to you. They don't mean to lie. They don't even know they're lying. They just want to be nice, not, they'll either be jerks or they'll be nice. And if they're jerks, they're just going to say no, no matter what you say. But if they're nice, they're going to say, yeah, I definitely will, no matter whether they really will or not. And they don't even realize they won't.
Yeah.
So you ask, it's kind of like giving people free betas. Yeah, it's a beta test. Sure, I'll go ahead and try your product and test it, and they may or may not use it, and then they tell you what they want it to change because they don't really like it. And then when you change it, and then you start asking them for money, they don't want to actually buy it because they're not really using it or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
it's called the mom test because if you go to your mother, assuming you have a good relationship with your mother, but let's say you go to your mother and you want to start a business, you say, Mom, I've got this great idea for this really cool business. You tell her about it and you go, what do you think? Well, what is she going to say? No, you're stupid. You're going to fail. You'll never amount to anything. No, it's not what a mother with a healthy relationship. She's going to
Yeah,
say,
right. That's a good
I,
point. Yeah.
right. Yeah, right. I love you. I think you're brilliant. I know you'll be successful. This is such a smart idea. Right. And that's
Mm,
what she's going to say. So, because you're not asking the right questions. So, how do you ask those questions and get actual, honest, valuable answers from even your
mm.
mother? That's why it's called the mom test.
I love that. And
And
I looked it up. Rob Fitzpatrick. Does that sound right?
thank you, Rob
Yeah.
Fitzpatrick. Yeah, yeah, and it's just really well done and smart. And he basically turns the whole thing around into a clinical exercise. So
Mm,
instead of loving the product and loving your idea, which is the biggest failure, biggest indication whether a founder is going to fail or not if they come at the product from that perspective
Mm,
versus taking off that black robe and the vision religion robe, right, and putting on the white uh, coat and becoming a clinician, where anything you don't know for sure is an assumption, and you go test it. And how do you
mm,
test it so that you're getting accurate metrics on the things you're testing? In particular,
mm.
you think it's a good idea. Is it a good idea? So what are
Right.
the who cares about the idea? What problem is it solving? So founders who are consistently successful come at, there's a big problem in this industry. We believe we can solve this problem. We know it has a high cost and that people perceive it as having a very high impact to them because of this problem. So we know how to reach these people because of the high perception of this impact. They'll lean forward when we talk to them about their problem,
Mm,
and they'll see if we can fix it. And then we talk about ways of mitigating that problem, and they start to get very motivated, right? So that's really different than talking about what a great product and trying to convince people how wonderful it is, or
yeah.
believing that people will just see the wonder in it, right? So
Yeah.
those founders are successful a much higher percentage of the time. They love the problem, and they love sitting and talking to customers about their problems. And
I want to
they
touch on this a
Yeah,
little bit because I
sure,
love
sure.
I love where this is going, and especially, with this audience, we've got a lot of people who are in STEM or work either in academia or they work in the private world, but in a science perspective. That clinician way of thinking at it, I don't think many science-minded folks have that opportunity early in their career to understand how much people and business and how much business is people of allowing you to do science. And we're at this intersection now where private space and public space are colliding, and we're going to figure out here with the next administration what happens with all of
Right.
that. But
Yeah.
I think it's something I would love to pick more on, and how much about it is understanding people. And I think many science-minded folks, critical thinkers, they don't necessarily think of it that way, and they kind of shy away from it because it seems emotional, but
Shy away from what?
shy
Uh,
away from understanding kind of like, I guess,
how people
what
are
holds
impacted
up
by
the
something.
science, right? Like, or like at the end of the day, like you might be all focused on the details of the things that you're doing or doing the best science that you can, but
Mm-hmm.
realizing the environment that you're in, right? Even in an academic sense, you're still getting funding that allows you to enable that. So like
Mm-hmm.
you might have to go and talk to people who are going to help invest in that, and how much, you know, being a customer facing uh tech or science role, how valuable that can
That's
be.
so interesting. It's almost the opposite of your typical startup founder, right?
Mm,
Because that's all they do is wear the white robe,
right.
but they're missing and they are looking at the problem, and they
Mm,
know who in the problem impacts, and they do studies, right? But they don't, but the understanding of the vision and the actual community themselves, that's not, they're not involved in that process, right?
right.
So it's
And I think an
literally the
understanding of
counter.
that would
You
help a
almost want to
ton.
take that person and make them the executive operations person for this founder with a vision, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because you got to blend those two mindsets to be successful in a startup.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah,
80, you said over 80 different startups that you guys have worked with and gone through
yeah,
this process?
close to 90 now. Yeah.
That's
Oh no,
incredible.
not gone through. You mean launch first? No. Oh, that I've
Oh,
gone
okay.
through the startup process with. Oh yeah, and
Mm.
so yeah, yeah. Launch first is a lot newer than that.
Okay,
You
talk
know, it's
talk to
the
me about
last.
launch first.
Okay, so launch first. Uh, so, like I said, founders fail in these high numbers because they don't ask for,
Right.
they don't ask, they don't get in front of their potential customers early.
Mm.
And they invest all this money building the thing that they believe, that word believe, that's a killer. That's a killer for startups,
Yep.
that they believe it people need and want. So, a couple things. One, and this isn't quite launch first yet, but founders that I hear they've got this vision. They want to do this new social media thing. They don't, it's not a particular problem in an industry that they struggle with necessarily. They just think this would be really cool. The chances that's going to be successful is like one in a million. You have a Zuckerberg, and you've got, who just had that incredibly rare one in a billion sense for the right thing at the right time, and he was at the right time, in terms of just the trajectory of technology when he decided to try to make all the connections through social media.
Right.
And because social media that was out there was just not really effective, and he had some good ideas, but
Mm,
he was able to quickly test his ideas.
right. He
In
was a
right,
customer and was able to deploy it in
right.
the customer base. Yeah.
He wanted something that made connections a lot more personal and right, and private,
Yeah.
and so you could build your networks independent of being some public thing. And he was able to build something, a quick MVP in a month or whatever it was. He's
Mm.
also a brilliant guy, and he was able to put it out there. I mean, it was a pretty ugly product initially, and this was a founder who built something that, like, when it started to take off in the first year or two, they were crashing every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally, and they had to restart servers and scale memory. And I mean, because they didn't have any caching capability, had to write memcache. And I mean, it was a classic. We're going to do a simple MVP. And then this thing took off, and there was no scalability, but it was so popular that people still. But that is so. It's unfortunate. I know. I think my mic keeps switching back and
Yeah, it just
forth.
switched out a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Um, yeah, it's a problem with my mic's connection. If I just breathe on it wrong, it like disconnects. So I'm going to fix that next week. Uh, uh, so I can't even begin to tell you how rare somebody like him is, or
Mm,
somebody like Elon Musk,
mm,
or who, by the way, he did launch first. He came up with this concept for his electric cars, right? And he pre-sold how many of those Sportsters, right?
yep.
There was no
The
car. It looked
Roadster.
like there
Yeah.
was a car, but there were no cars. So he did pre-launch sales in a big way to prove that there was a market, and to help him fund it, right? And
Yeah.
so and then it took him forever to come out with the Roadster, but that people were in love with the concept. So
Right.
um, uh, uh, and then you've got where was I going with this? Uh,
Just how
but those are
rare that
so
combination of
it's
person is.
so
Yeah.
rare.
Yeah.
But he first of all, you're talking about people with IQ and vision, and the rare combination of the two things that are just
Yeah.
that create unicorns, right? But people talk about the problem with a lot of founders is that they are driven by what the VC world has created, and that's this concept that you've got to basically get funding to build your product and to build your company early on. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just not true. So
Mm,
you can self-fund a lot of things yourself if you do pre-launch sales. So the
right.
idea with launch first, and it was born out of the fact that we used to do these, or we still do, so really sophisticated design prototypes that
Mm,
look and feel like a real product, but there's nothing behind it. But we do that because we want to iterate through all the user experience um, nuances with the
mm,
founder early on, and we'll spend a lot of time, and it's dramatically less expensive than iterating through the development of the product and trying to figure out all the workflows at that time.
mm,
And because then you go, no, that's not going to work, and change it. Now you're rewriting code, and it's costly and it's slow.
yeah.
So we do it all in the design until we've got something that looks like a completely finished product, your vision, not the MVP, but like the 2-year roadmap of your product.
Mm,
Because that way it all holds together. The vision makes sense. It's really going to provide the kind of value you believe it's going to provide. And then they're so realistic. I thought, why don't we go to client? And then we started doing that about 10, 11 years ago. And I said, so few years back, I said, why don't you try to convince some of my customers to go to their potential prospects that would
mm,
buy it and say, why don't we go there and demo this and see if we can't get them to buy in early? I mean, if this was really that important to them, and you give them a good enough deal, like a lifetime license, if they pay for
right.
12-month subscriptions in advance, or whatever the right value proposition is for that customer, And we tested this with 4 different businesses. 3 of them we were very successful in these
Mm.
pre-launch sales. And one of
Wow.
them we weren't, because the pandemic had just started, and we were marketing a product to Native American reservations, to tribal councils who had all shut down, and you could not get
Wow.
a hold of them. So I don't know if it would have been successful if they were accessible at the time, but that was the one that wasn't. The other ones
Mm.
were really successful. One was a real estate product that we, in the first 60
Oh,
days, we sold 23. It was for real estate portfolio investors. And it was a portfolio management system. And we sold 23 licenses for close to $70,000 in the first
wow.
60 days. And that's what kicked off development of that product. Another one was for aerospace parts distributors. It was well, it doesn't matter what the product was, but it was
Right.
an important product there. And we did 3 demos. All 3 of them sold for $15,000 each, right?
Wow.
45,000. That was 3 demos. And there's 15,000 potential clients in that market. And the third one was clinical trial software. We sold 2 copies in with 2 different demos for 250,000 for each in pre-sale. No software, right? Just demoing what very
What it could
sophisticated
do.
looking prototype, not just design mock-ups, but much more
Right.
than that. It didn't do anything, but it looked like it was a finished product.
Hmm.
And so it was like, okay, this is definitely a thing. And this makes a lot more sense to do this. Um, with the real estate one, the first few demos didn't quite do it. We had to go back and make some changes based on feedback, and then it
Hmm.
started to happen. But the
Cool.
changes we can do in a couple of weeks. So we're able to
Hmm.
pivot very easily. There was one more since that we did for a couple people in Hollywood that were trying to build a product that was, anyway, that one we got to the demo stage and nobody was interested in buying it. We pivoted a few times and that one failed, but it failed fast and cheap because we didn't start development, right? And I
Yeah.
can't tell you all the destroyed lives that I've seen with startups where they spend years and hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of investor money and often a lot of their own money,
Yeah.
and they end up going bankrupt or marriages get destroyed, or it's just personal disasters. So
Well, and how
really
many
fast
of
and cheap
those
is
happen?
huge.
Yeah,
Pardon me?
fast and cheap. Fast and cheap is the game, right? I mean, I've been around tech long enough to have seen so many like startups and promises made that never
Right.
come through, and the amount of money. We're living in the post the river is full of funding era. In this
It never
post.
was. It never was.
It's a good. It's
It
a good
was
point.
easier to get,
Yeah,
10
it was
years
easier
ago
to
than
get.
it is now, but it was
But that
never
was the
just
promise that everyone was dreaming of. Yeah.
so. This
Yeah.
is from 3 years ago when funding was still more available than it is now.
Yeah.
And I read an article that had these metrics in it, and then I have some friends who are VCs or work in VC firms, and I
Mm,
corroborated this with 3 other people. For the typical VC, for a healthy VC, because not all of them are healthy, right? But for a
yeah.
healthy VC, they'll get 3,000 pitch decks, of which they dispel 1,500 of them, very just with, and these are analysts that are quickly just going, it doesn't fit
Right.
our model, whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
And then out of those 1,500, they do a deeper dive. And out of those 1,500, they'll take 300 to a senior analyst, and then they'll whittle it down to 60. And then those 60 go to the partners, and they'll pick 30 of those 60. So
Mm,
3,000 to 30 get any funding at all with a typical VC. And out of
mm,
those 30, 2 to 3 of them will be successful and scale, or exit or go public. Um, and the rest of them are anywhere from they barely are making a living to they fail and go out of business, or they sell and get their money back out of it. So that chances of success, even from the VC perspective, if you think of the filtering system they have, is just unbelievable.
right.
0.01% are right, basically get, what is it, 0.1%? We have 3,000, 30. My math isn't happening. 30 versus 3,000. So
Yeah.
0.1% get funding out of all the pitches that go, right? Is that
Yeah.
right? 30. Yeah. So or 1%, whatever it is. And then out of that,
Oh.
it's another tenth of that. It's less than but usually about a tenth of that actually are successful, right?
Mhm.
I think those metrics are 80%, 80%, 70 or 80% of VC funded startups fail.
Yeah.
That's those are metrics that I've seen. I don't know. I think it's probably lower than that
Mm.
because not everything gets recorded properly when things fail. So, but if you're
Yeah.
not talking about VC funded startups, it's 95 to 98% of tech startups fail because
Yeah.
most of them never get into a point of any kind of metric that gets measured.
Well, and when you
Um,
think of that, of those odds, it's something I've learned having a 3D printing business here and this podcast and seeing and working exclusively in startups for the most part, like that fail fast and cheap.
mhm.
Like it really is more about the amount of attempts than it is about getting the one idea that, like you were saying, that you love, that you believe in, to
Yeah,
work on the first try. It's just keep testing, like that iterative approach of,
right,
how many attempts can you get at this? We do that with 3D printed products here. We've got an Etsy store.
right,
We have an idea that it's like, I have a problem I want to solve. I make it. I test it. Once I'm happy with it, because I'm the user, I put it out there. And if it works, great. If I get feedback, we make it better.
right,
And
right.
but that's super cheap for me.
That's
I'm a
exactly right. Yeah,
manufacturer.
yeah. You've got a built-in testing lab the way that you
Yes.
guys run, and that's so important, right?
Yeah.
Because it may work, but it may not work right, and so you might get enough sales at least so that it's enough to fund fixing what's not right with it, right,
Yeah.
or not, right?
Right. Right.
And then you refine it. If you're still not getting more sales, even though it works better, then it's just then it's not there's not product market fit, or
Right.
the market is so tiny
Mm.
that the cost to reach that market is too high, and
Yeah.
so this it's the same thing, right?
Totally.
um, yeah. So a founder's first job, number one and only job when they want to start a company, and nobody ever, I've never heard this. I've never heard anybody say this except for me.
Mm.
I've, if you read things like the mom test and other, then you kind of get a feeling that they're implying the same thing. But to me, it's like you have to identify all of the niches, really tight niches that you can possibly market to. You need to know what they all are. You don't have to pick one yet, but you
Mm.
will very quickly. And then you need to then sift out all the problems that you're solving from a very root level. If you stand in the shoes of the stakeholder in each of those niches, how do they define that problem? It's at a very personal level, so that when you say
Mm.
to them, I do struggle with, and they go, God, I hate that. It has to get to that survival kind of mechanism level.
Mm-hmm.
And any problem statement that you have that's general but is important, if you just ask why does that matter enough times, you'll get to that root survival level reason why that stakeholder
Mm.
needs that fixed. And that's important because you can't get their attention if you don't distill it out to that level, right?
Right.
If you can't get them to go, oh, I hate that, and then they open their eyes and lean forward and say, do you have a solution for that? Right, that's what you
Right.
need. Right,
Yeah.
that's how you know you've got your potential early adopter. So
Mm.
you got to figure out which of those niches and which problem statements, which niche is the one that has the highest perceived impact to their top two or three problems, perceived.
Right.
And separately, hit my mic again and knock my.
Sounds still good though.
I get, like I told you, I start waving my hands, I'm in trouble. And then, and which of those have the highest perceived impact, and separately, a highest cost to that impact, because those are two independent correlations. You may perceive that this has a huge impact to you, but it doesn't actually, when you actually measure it, it doesn't cost all that much. But it just may be an inconvenience factor. You're afraid it's going to somehow get you in trouble, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
perception wise, it's high. Conversely, you may have something that's very high cost, but maybe it's in an industry everybody's dealing with this, and you always have. And so, of course, we're always going to deal with this problem. So the perception of the impact is not high because it's just been with you forever, whatever the reason.
Mm.
So what you're looking for is both of those numbers high, because the perception is you can get them to listen to you, because they want it fixed. And the cost is you can charge enough to be profitable.
Right.
Which niche is it, and which are the top 2 or 3 problems that achieve that? That's the number one job a founder has when they start a startup.
Mm.
But no, usually nobody does that because nobody's telling them that's required,
Mm.
and the methodologies don't make that very clear. Anyway, so
Where do you think that is that something that is like an industry falsity? Like people just believed it, or people ran off that for a while? Like I'm thinking like early days of Steve Jobs. Is everyone trying to be Steve Jobs without
yeah,
doing the
right.
work?
Yeah,
Like
they
where did that
shouldn't try
come
to be
from?
Steve. They shouldn't try. People should not be trying to hit grand slams. It just
Mm.
the chances of hitting that grand slam. We all know how often that happens, right? Like
Yep.
in a World Series game, and a grand slam
Yeah.
happens.
Right.
Then you're going back like how many decades to find somebody else that's done that, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Totally.
that's not what you want to hit. You want to know you can hit a solid single most of the time.
Mm.
That's what people. If you can build a business and find that niche customer and you get product market fit, which means they will, that the amount of energy it takes to get a customer is 1/3 of, from a dollar perspective of what the value of that customer is from a lifetime on average. There's different things that change that ratio, but in
Right.
general, um, and you can do that in an industry that's specific with a niche, and you can build and marketing around that niche, and can satisfy the niche and grow your business. You can get to 1 million, 3, 5 million in a year, 2, 3 years, right?
Mm.
You've hit a home run. Well, you may not think it because you're not hitting that 100 million, 500 million, get VC, but you can do this also. Most of it self-funded, or maybe some friends and family
Yeah.
money if really required, but you're nailing it. And now from there, you've got a platform with a big customer base that you can leverage to grow into 10, $20 million, right? And
Right.
then you've got 10 to 20 million. Or you're doing these pre-launch sales, right? Now all of a sudden you've got this growing customer base. You don't even have a product yet, and growing revenue.
Mm.
And now if you do want to raise money, it's a whole different discussion with an investor than it
Mm.
is when you're trying to pitch them on an idea.
Right. Yeah. If you're bringing this is like that, I think what most people would think of from a Shark Tank perspective. It's like, hey, you're already making revenue. We're not, this isn't
And you
theoretical.
don't
This
even have a
is,
product yet.
yeah.
Wow,
Yeah. Exactly.
there's something here, right? Now
Yeah.
you can get an investor's attention really easily. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. No, that's very interesting. That's very
And some
interesting.
of your customers might become investors. It depends on who your customers
Right.
are, right?
Right. If it's that valuable to them, they want to get in
Yeah.
and yeah, totally. Oh
Yeah.
man. So, I mean, so the space world, the space industry, as far as tech, is in a really interesting position where we've got these private companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab and Blue Origin that are like providing the resources to go to space for the public entity, NASA, right? And
Mm.
taxpayers.
Right.
Then we've also got the military side of things and the defense side of things where a
Right.
lot of the tech is really old and hasn't been
Right.
updated a long time. And they're just getting to this point where a lot of this new tech is going to end up in this, Space Force for a lot of different things that they're doing is advancing the tech that's being used in space right now. So, like,
Right.
there's all these opportunities right now for
Right.
different things to happen. Um, I don't know how close you've been following it, but I wonder how you might think about this as an approach and just like have you been following the industry growth at all in the
A
space
little bit.
industry?
A little
A little
bit.
bit?
That's not. I mean, I love space and all
Yeah.
the tech that's coming out of that. And but no, but from a business perspective, this most of this, it's very few startups that I talk to that actually are, because they're all software startups, and
Right.
space, it's always hardware components, right,
Right.
associated with it, and then software that supports our hardware, so it might be IoT devices, or but not as much on the space side.
Yeah.
But I do know that, like, for a startup that wants to get involved with government contracts, again, same sort of thing.
Mm.
There's a successful technique. I've not tried it or experienced it myself, but where you go find you figure out a problem that needs to be solved, You
Mm,
identify it in some agency, whether it's space or whether it's Homeland Security, whatever it is, and you know it's a problem because there's public discourse around it, right? And
right.
whoever the stakeholders are in that department are talking about this, and so you spend as much time talking with people in that department that have some kind of budget control in that world. And if you talk about ways of solving those problems, they might be simple workflow things, right?
Mm, right.
Which
Right.
workflow automation is like the coolest thing ever. It's been around forever. But when you actually are successful fixing a broken workflow, the impact it has on the people that are affected by it is dramatic. And I can give you a really, really simple, but a really powerful example of that. And I'll do that in a minute.
Okay.
So, but if you find that person, you figure out what that workflow is, you come up with that product that would fix those workflows for that agency and others, and you maybe build a design prototype. You go to the people that are the stakeholders, you show them, and if they really like it, then you don't even have to be a government contractor. They can connect you with one that you can sub for
Mm,
and direct them to, which is a way that some people get into government contracting. It's sort of a way around the limitations of not being on a GSA list and not being, and now you're working in for basically delivering a product to government, to the government through uh, uh, you know some major government contract that already has contracts,
right.
and they're just subbing you to basically as a way of bringing you in.
Yeah.
I don't
Uh,
know if that is helpful in terms of what the question you were thinking of asking, but it
yeah.
still goes to that whole pre-sale concept, right?
It does. It totally does. And like, so I'm thinking of the space industry, and you mentioned hardware, and that is totally a huge limit on how far these companies can go because
Mm-hmm.
even if it involves going to space, you still have to get to space. And until the last 5 years, where SpaceX is launching every day almost,
Mm-hmm.
getting to space could take you years, and your company might not even survive the amount of time it's going to take for you to get on that rocket.
Oh,
So
you mean if you want to compete with them and
sure,
compete with a SpaceX? Oh, you're talking. Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to start out. You have to be a mega billionaire, right?
right.
If you're even thinking of going that
Well, I'm
direction.
even talking about like all the small companies that work together. So for instance, like putting a satellite up into
The cottage
space.
industry. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's so many different companies that are involved or subsets that are involved in getting that whole payload into space.
Right.
And from a software perspective, it feels like you have uh less cost and less like run out of waiting for that thing to get to space, where there's so many things that could be potentially worked on, from the ground systems that launch the rockets to the companies that plan these missions. Like software wise, I feel like there's so
Right.
much more opportunity today and in the next 5 years than there is in competing with someone like a SpaceX. That's a marathon of a
Oh,
of a
yeah.
business. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That yeah. Trying to compete with SpaceX if you're not
Or Blue
Bezos or
Origin with Jeff Bezos. I mean, he's got money to
right.
keep that thing running for a while.
Exactly. You've got to, because you're
Yeah.
well, he's and he's taken an Amazon approach to that. How many
Mm,
decades did Amazon, or how
right.
many years did Amazon lose money in huge amounts before it started to be show profits, right? I think a
Right.
decade at least.
Yeah.
Um, but and it's funny, I just had a conversation with somebody about this too.
Mm,
And the thing with Amazon was they continued to get more and more investment because Bezos was a master at articulating the need to own the market, to
mm,
own all these different factions in the market. So he was growing really fast, but he had to continue to build out his infrastructure and grow faster. So and he
mm.
was able to convince investors to continue to fund this behemoth that
Yeah.
was losing money every year but growing so fast that because otherwise, if he didn't grow that fast, Walmart would have come in and taken the market away from him, or
Right.
other big, really deep pocketed organizations that didn't have
Mm,
the vision he had, that and that weren't proving product market fit, because he had product market fit. He had massively growing sales,
Mm.
The problem was his costs were growing out of proportion to that.
Mm. And they
Um, uh,
really, I mean, talking about addressing a niche and a solution for people,
yeah.
like getting like that next day shipping and that prime shipping and just
Oh,
the
it's amazing.
ease of get buying and getting something that
What, I have
they've
to go to the store to buy something? What happened? What's wrong with the world?
yeah, yeah.
That shift didn't take very long, right?
No, no, it was as soon as people got a taste, they were like, "Oh, this is good."
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to know another big shift like that that's
Mm,
happening? Well, that will be happening, and it's going to be like a tipping point where all of a sudden it's just mad. So I'm going to make a
mm.
prediction.
Okay.
We'll talk again in 7 or 8 years and see if my prediction's coming true. But I
Okay.
think that the day of the multi-story parking garage or underground parking garage, like
Mm,
underneath a shopping center, those things, if you're invested in it, sell your investment as quick as you can, because it's going to be worth nothing in
mm.
about somewhere between 3 to 7 years. I'm not sure exactly when that tipping point will happen. It'll be really fast though. It'll happen almost overnight. It'll feel like it.
Yeah.
Why do you think? Why do you think I'm making this prediction? I'm just
My
curious.
first thought that came to my head was they're just like so I'm a millennial and
Yeah,
getting my license it was and my permit was like a big thing at 16. I wanted to be able to drive myself around. I can't tell you how many kids or people who are younger than me, Gen
yeah.
Z, don't even have a license. I have
I
millennial
know.
friends
What
that
is
don't even
that
have a
about?
license.
What is that about?
Why do
Ha-
they have Uber? They have
mhm.
Uber, they have everything at the tip of their fingertips. Why
Yeah,
spend the money and then have incur the cost of fixing a car?
yeah.
Which
Well, okay.
are, I do get that. I do get that in some
Yeah,
ways,
but
but
what about all the people that are 40 and 50 and 60? I mean, so it's
right.
going to be everybody.
Yeah.
Here's why. Here's why I think. Okay. Have you driven in a Waymo or self-driving car?
Yes. Yes. It's
Okay,
weird.
right. They're cool.
They
Yeah,
are
they're
cool.
very cool. And they're incredibly safe compared to you driving yourself. So I go out to Phoenix every month, and that was
Mm.
one of Waymo's first
Oh, that's
cities.
right. They have them out there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And at first, they had a very small radius area. It's only in the last 3 or 4 months that they've really expanded it. So I can go.
Mm.
My mom lives out in Phoenix. So I moved from there a
Ah.
couple of years ago, and I go back every month to so that she doesn't feel like I abandoned her. And right,
You're a
and
good son.
she
You're a
has her
good
honeydew
son.
list, and I help her with her computer all day, and
Nice.
so anyway, so I go out every month, and now Waymo will pick you up right in the ride share, just in the last 2 months,
Mm.
right in the ride share spot at the airport with all the other ride shares,
Wow.
and it'll drive up 25 miles north to my mom's place. Won't get on the freeway yet. I know that's coming in another month or two or
Okay.
three when they right? And then it'll get on the freeway. So it takes a little
Mm.
longer, but who cares? I'm sitting in the back playing chess or, reading or
Sure.
doing work or
You
whatever.
now have gained back that time. Yeah.
I've gained back the time. I've reduced the risk, right? And it
Mm.
costs half of what Uber costs to get me
Oh,
up to the
geez.
same place because there's no driver and they don't have competition yet. So now imagine in 3 years and Uber's come out with their self-driving car.
Yeah.
Tesla's come
Robo
out with their
taxis.
whole self-driving thing,
Hmm.
and there's a Tesla service to take your car if you're not using it and turn it into a taxi. You make money from
Right.
it, right? And all of a sudden, there's this massive pool of self-driving taxis, right,
Yeah.
available, and this will happen really pretty fast, and then why would you buy another car at that point, right? Because
Totally.
the cost of owning a car is dramatically higher than this, especially when the price pressures and bring it down. Even to work every day, it'll be nothing compared to what it costs you to drive your car to work every day.
Yeah.
Plus, you have to park, and then you have to maintain your car, and there'll be such a saturation of these that within a minute or maybe 2 minutes, you'll always be able to get one. Unlike
Mm.
with Uber or Lyft, right?
Right.
Because the number of cars available for this will be just massive,
Mm.
and you don't have to worry about idle time with the car because of a person's time.
Right.
So, right. Oh, there'll be a point, and all of a sudden, it's just the only way you do it. Nobody will park in a shopping center anymore.
Mm.
Nobody will take their car and park at a football game or a baseball game or all these parking structures disappear. In fact, how
Yeah.
they'll start building homes won't include driveways potentially, or they'll have these little half-size car garages
Mm.
because you don't need them anymore. You know, you have
Yeah.
it for your. It's going to
Totally.
happen really fast once it happens. It may be 3 or 4 years before you start to get a little saturation. Then it's going to be, and it's just going to be like almost overnight.
Yeah,
And
I
then
I
all
mean I
those,
see a
yeah.
little bit of that now. Like I see there's some entrepreneurs, they run like a rental car service, especially with Teslas, um, out of, the Burlington area. And basically they use the parking in those business parks because there's more than half of those parking lots are not even full. So you've got all this empty space. It's free parking. You just
Mhm.
bring a car there for a few hours, it gets rented out, and then it's going out. So to your point, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for someone who's going to own taxis, these auto
Right.
taxis, to put them in a place. They should be driving around, getting ready for
Right.
the
And
next
then
person. Yeah,
there'll be charging stations that plug themselves in, so it won't
yeah,
require anybody.
totally.
Just kind of like your Roomba, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, after it's
Yeah,
finished cleaning the house, it plugs itself in and charges. So it'll be like that with the cars, right?
and
And
it'll be crazy. Yeah,
yeah, so it'll happen fast. And I've seen
I
a
agree with you.
disruption like this. I've witnessed this before. It's not, Musk didn't say, I'm going to get rid of all the parking garages in the world, right? That wasn't his
Right.
plan.
That's not the goal, right?
Right. That wasn't his goal. Right. In fact, he probably never, well, he might have thought of it because he truly does have freaky vision
Yeah.
capability, but he may never have thought about that. Right.
Mm,
That's just not important to him. But just like the guys who started Uber,
mm,
never thought they would displace an entire class of vehicle in Southeast Asia. 7 years after they started Uber. That was the story. So I was going to India every, 3 times a year or so from 2010 until the pandemic started.
mm,
And I went on 15 trips, basically building my teams out in India, and working with them and cultivating them, and
mm.
um, uh, because really building a really exceptional team, no matter where they are in the world, you have to have presence there
Yeah.
so that they and be working with them and develop personal relationships, especially if you want to create an exceptional kind of result from
Yeah.
the way that the teams work. um, so anyway, so I used to go out all right. Then from 2010 to 2015, and no matter when I would land in Mumbai, and it would be originally a 5.5 hour drive out to Pune, or later on, as they improved the roads, that went down to like 2 hours. So I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
but it was just buried in Mumbai and in Pune, not in between,
Mm,
surrounded by these three-wheeled motorized rickshaws. Right, they come tuk-tuks or autos, depending on where in the world you
right.
are. And you look, like, if you're in a traffic jam and you look up, that's all you see is these black roofs of all these. It's like phenomenal, the quantity, like millions of them.
Wow.
So from 2015 to 2016, I took like a 15-month hiatus, traveling to India. I don't remember exactly why, but then I went back. And as we were driving through Mumbai, I thought there's something really different. I don't know what it is. And then we got into Pune. It was like, where are all the tuk-tuks? It was like 10 of those to one car before, and now it was 10 cars to one tuk-tuk.
Mm,
I mean, this is like millions of the whole industry just shut down. And I thought it must be like government regulation. Two-stroke motors, bad for the air. I couldn't think of what else would cause it. So I
mm.
got to the office, and my director, name is Shalaka, director of our team there. I said, what happened to all the tuk-tuks? She said, well, Uber's come to India. I said, why does that matter? She said, well, they won't approve them.
Oh,
Wiped out a whole industry of vehicles and
wow.
all the drivers that owned them. Unbelievable. I couldn't,
Wow.
my mouth was hanging open. She told me that. I was like, okay, that is true disruption. And it's not, and if you look back at all these totally disruptive things, it's rarely something the founder ever thought would happen, or it was just a consequence of
Right.
the adoption and growth, right?
Mm,
Of a phenomenal adoption and growth. Anyway, long story short, the next a year later, all they were all back because there was a new service competing with Uber in India, I think called Walla, and they approved them. And so, of course, Uber to compete with them
Oh,
had to approve them. And so, like overnight, they're all back.
that's it's amazing how quickly it can shift when there's a demand for
Yeah,
something. Yeah,
yeah. Anyway,
man,
so
that definitely
disrupt.
makes you
That's
think. Yeah,
oh yeah, yeah. So say goodbye to parking garages. What's all what's think about like New York City or Chicago or Boston.
Boston.
What's going to happen to all that real estate?
Yep. I can't tell you how many empty buildings there are in Boston that
Mhm.
were built in the last 10 years.
Yeah,
Um,
office space, right?
oh, no, not even just office space, actual apartments that are priced out of what anyone can afford.
Oh,
We
yeah.
have a lot of financial and we have a lot of medical, and there's a whole section of Boston that's literally just medical personnel.
And New
So
York City's got the same problem. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I don't know who owns
And
these
they
that
keep
can just
building them.
afford it, but
I think
they keep
it's
building them. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that I don't get. But the
Yeah.
part, that's some kind of weird sheltering money, or laundering money kind of thing. I have,
Yeah.
or yeah, from over. I have no idea what that's all about. But the parking garage
Yeah.
one, I can see that one coming.
That one makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense because it's very specific. It's not like you need like you need to bring in cars. And if there aren't cars to get brought in, like it's just like there's
Right. They're
what's
just pulling up to drop people off, right?
yeah,
So you'll have these
exactly.
big, like 8 lane, drop off areas, right?
Right.
At
Right.
games and you'll just have these self driving cars all lined up to drop people off,
Yeah.
6 deep or whatever, and move people in and
Mhm.
out really fast. And
Totally.
plus, self driving cars, if you have enough of them on the road, then traffic's going to move along smoother because they'll, start to swarm as they get smarter.
Hey, being in Boston, I can tell you anything to improve the traffic would be amazing.
Yeah, right.
I do think that in the beginning here, there really should be a lane dedicated to these robo taxis.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think it's better from testing. Why not
Mhm.
test it in a controlled environment instead of adding the variable of humans on the road? Um, there's also, and I wanted to ask you about this, and um, I think that prediction with the parking garage is going to happen regardless, but I've seen it
Yeah.
definitely with certain types of tech. And I think specifically there was a phone that was based entirely around the fact that it would pause or stop doing something when you looked at it. And I remember there was just a straight up, people just said, nope, we don't like that. And now it's in every device and Face ID has that as a feature. But um,
Right.
it was
Oh
something
wait,
that
that
people
would
said,
stop
we
doing
don't
what it
want
would
that.
stop. It would stop doing what?
I think the whole commercial was around the fact that like you were watching a video and then you would look
Mhm.
away and it would pause automatically for you.
Oh,
I think it was like a
because it was paying attention to your face, right?
exactly, and I think
And
that
people didn't
freaked people
trust
out.
that, and people
Yeah,
didn't trust it, right?
exactly. And I think it was a feature that
Yeah, it's
might
pretty
have been
cool.
cool, but it wasn't something that people wanted.
Well, you also
Um,
worry, is it going to stop for the wrong reasons a bunch, and then you're going to get frustrated watching the video. And so,
100%
I'd
bugs
say kind of an
exist.
interesting idea. That's one that would require a lot of market testing to see if that's a that is a great idea that may or may not be solving a problem, right?
Right,
So,
right.
um, right, have people complain because they're missing video when they look away? Is it really a problem that needs to be solved? What's the perceived impact because of
Yes.
that? Right?
Yes.
How much is it really costing people enough that they're going to
Hmm.
go? So everything goes down to do I feel threatened by it? Because if I do, then I'm
Right.
going to do something to mitigate it. Even vacations, you can see this beautiful beach scene, and
Hmm.
that's appealing to you because you're afraid you're going to miss out in your life if you don't do that right, and you feel threatened by living that
Right.
life, that person that you don't want to be, right? This all comes that I didn't used to think that way, but the more I see things over years, I realize it all comes down to fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and that's what drives people to
Yeah.
do something.
And it
Yeah.
can also kill great companies or great ideas before they even start, right? Like if people just straight up boycott it, it doesn't like that phone just
What they
disappeared,
do,
you know?
that if they do, it might have been solving a problem, but it was creating a bigger one, and they weren't talking to the people
Right.
who have the problem.
Right.
right?
And that's where I feel like right now AI is
Yeah.
sitting. I think there's a really interesting marketing technique. And I know it's going to change. I know the marketing will
Hmm.
change and the AI will get better, but it feels like we're in this very strange era of AI where the perceived use of it, like all the marketing is around the fact that it is going to help you cheat in this. Like you don't remember the person's name, but you're going to look at, you're going to use AI to remember that person's name. And then they think that you're a nice person that you remember their name.
Hmm.
Like it's all about,
If you think of that as cheating, but I don't
sure.
think of it as cheating. I think of it as helping to facilitate the relationship. So it's an
Mm.
interesting perspective difference, right?
Yes.
I may just be bad at remembering names, and somebody else just has a photographic memory around it. It's not
Yeah.
because they're nicer or any
Yeah.
better. They have the AI built into their head already for that.
A
Like
hundred percent.
Barry
And I'll
Gold.
give you an example for me.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I am terrible at structured writing.
yeah.
It's why I went into engineering because writing was a horrible experience for me. I
Hmm.
use
Right,
ChatGPT right now to help give me a structure, and then I fill the ideas. I'm great with ideas. I can
right.
spit out ideas all day.
Right.
And
And
that's
then it can articulate it in a really well thought
right.
out, well articulated manner. Right.
Yeah,
So
and so
is
I
that
totally
cheating?
agree with you
So
on
is
that.
that cheating? Not necessarily if it's
No.
expressed. Right.
No,
That's
and
my
I think
point.
we're in
So
this immature phase of
yeah.
how AI is being shown to people. We did an episode where I just talked about the AI tools we use for the podcast, gave
Hmm.
numbers on how it's helped my life because I
Hmm.
feel like there is a lot of AI that is more of a perceived fear for folks than it is for a value for folks.
Hmm.
And I don't think that the marketing is really hitting on the true value for people. So I feel like
Oh gosh.
it's this intersection point
What
where I'm not
marketing are
sure.
you? What marketing are you referring
A
to?
lot of the new iPhone, like the new cell
Oh,
phone AI stuff, because that's what most people are seeing right now
well,
as far as AI.
I've got the new iPhone
Mm.
16. Where's my camera? I
How
don't
do
know
you
if you
like
can
it?
see it, but it's awesome because
Yeah.
the camera is so damn good,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
it has real zoom. So if like I'm looking way back out there and I can't make something out, I can go into the phone and zoom like 25 times in. Now I can see the
Crazy.
thing clearly, and it's like half the size of half my screen. It's amazing.
That's wild.
And in light and everything. That was my big reason. I upgrade every 3 or 4 years. So I had a 12. Both my wife and I did. So we
Yeah.
both went to the 16, and T-Mobile had a killer deal. They gave us
They're just giving them
almost
away.
$850 credit on our 12s, as long
Wow.
as they were in good condition. I don't have any
Wild.
idea how they did that. So hers was like, anyway, so we upgraded. And I also I needed to do it because I wanted to be able to use the AI features that come out. I
Mm.
have not taken advantage of any of the AI features. They are just clunky and stupid, so far as I can tell. I just
Yeah.
wanted to stick an emoji into a text message that says I can't do that, or it says I don't have that contact, and it's like, what? What?
Well, and
That's
this
not.
is the discrepancy
So
that
it's like
yeah,
stupid,
a
right?
hundred
That would
percent.
be awesome. Stick an emoji, a cute emoji of heart, me holding hearts, for my wife in
Right.
this text, right? And
Right.
it has no idea what I'm asking it. What? Yeah,
Yeah.
and I have the beta features on, so it's got the ability to do the image creation for me now, but I
Mm.
can't get it to create an image when I ask it to. I
Yeah.
mean, it's real, at least the one I'm asking it to. Anyway, so it's just not done right yet.
Hmm.
It has a long way to go as far as I'm concerned.
Yes,
Uh,
and that's really, I guess, what I'm trying to touch at is that
yeah,
the reality versus the perception is very stark, and
it is.
it feels like the whole reason to buy the phone is the AI, and like you just said, it's really not the reason that you use the phone.
No,
It's
I
everything
didn't.
else. Yeah,
I mean, I was curious about the AI about it because I wanted the camera and the speed.
yeah,
It's a much faster, more powerful phone, and memory, and all that. But
yeah.
the otherwise, it feels very much like my 12 did. It's
Mm,
not all that different, except when I'm using the camera, or I notice things that were kind of starting to lag a little bit. Nothing lags anymore.
mm,
But that's the phones. But when you're
yeah.
talking about AI in other contexts, it's like
Mm.
way beyond the promise. And the speed at which it's evolving is like unbelievable. So,
So give me some examples. Yeah, I want to hear from your
okay.
perspective.
All right. Well, so when okay, so I kind of like ChatGPT before ChatGPT came out, like 8 months before, I read an article in Scientific America
Mm.
that, and the article was about OpenAI, and it was written by OpenAI, right? And I read
Wow.
that, and I was like mind blown. So AI really can do this now. I went right onto OpenAI and started playing around with it, and it could do a lot in terms of just language related stuff,
Yeah.
which it never could do that before, right? Anything I ever saw was like sounded like it was coming from a computer, not from
Right, right,
natural, right?
right.
Right. And then so I started using it for different things, but not a lot because it was kind of limited. And then ChatGPT comes out. And then all of a sudden it's way more consumable, but still
Mm.
kind of limited it initially. And it was making lots of mistakes early on, right?
Yeah. Was
And
this like
hallucinating
two,
a lot.
ChatGPT 2, or were
I don't remember what the
early at least?
numbers were, but
Okay.
it was 2 years ago, December, right? When it came out, or
Right.
January.
It's come a long way
Yeah.
since then. Yeah.
It was, yeah, right. But it was cool. And it was
Mm.
starting to get better. I mean, the hallucination went on for a while. That
Mm.
seems to be pretty much mostly over now. Not over, but
Mm.
it's the rare case where I find it hallucinating in a clear way anymore.
Mm.
Um, but um, uh, but it started to get good enough where I was talking about it with my wife like 4 or 5 months after it came out, right after we moved,
Mm.
to San Diego. And we're standing in the backyard. She wants to do square foot gardening, right? She
Mm.
wants to grow all our vegetables. We're not vegetarians, but
Nice.
we eat a lot of vegetables. And she says, "How many do you think we need?" And I said, "I don't know. This is something, we could probably ask ChatGPT." Her sister calls right then. And she gets on a 10-minute call with her sister talking about the move and all that. And so I started a conversation while she's doing that. I started a conversation with ChatGPT, and I say, "We're living in Vista, California. So considering the microclimate here, we want to do square foot gardening. My wife and I are what our age was, and that we want to grow all our own vegetables, but we're not vegetarians. So keep
Mm.
that in mind. How many 4x4 beds do we need?" And so it told us how many. And then I said, "Great. Okay. So come up with what should I plant in each of these beds so that the things we're planting are companion plants with
Mm.
each other, because you
Mm.
don't put the same kinds of vegetables, all the same. You can't just put any vegetable together with other vegetables in a
Right.
bed, because they don't like each other, right?
Right.
So some are compatible and some are not.
Mm.
So then it tells me what, and I said, "For what season? Do this as a for all the seasons, and consider succession planting, which
Mm.
means that if I plant, let's say, lettuce right after I take onions out or whatever it is, it's going to hate the soil. Lettuce will,
Mm.
certain things like to follow other things, and certain things hate to follow other things. So you have the succession rotation for different seasons." And so it gave me that. Then I said, "Okay, so companion plants in the bed and succession planting." I said, "What companion flowers do I need?" Because you want to put flowers in with it so that it will draw the insects away. Certain flowers draw certain insects that might like cucumbers, but they like this flower better. And I can't tell you which, because
Yeah.
I'm not a gardener, but I know that this is
But you knew
really
enough about
important.
it. Yeah.
Right. But you put the wrong flower in there, and it's just going to bring the wrong kind of insect that's going to go after your cucumbers instead. Right.
Mm.
So then it gave me that. And I said, "Okay." And this was right when ChatGPT came out with the ability to create tables. So
Mm.
I said, "Okay, so create a schedule, by bed, by season, for all of this," right? And so it did a beautiful job. I think we were 8 beds. And so season one, season two, season three, season four, right? What do we plant
Mm.
in each bed, and what flowers?
That's
And so
awesome.
she gets off the phone, right? It's about a 10-minute call. She
Yeah.
gets off the
10
phone.
minutes, right?
Yeah, took 10 minutes. And I said, "What do you think of this?" She went, "How?" She couldn't even voice that, right? Because she was thinking this is going to take days
Right.
of research. And she looked at it, and she knows enough about gardening to know that this was all valid. And she
Mm.
was going, "Oh my God." Because I've been telling her about this, and then I got to show it to her. She said, "How did you do that?" So I went through the whole thing with her. That's how I think of working with these tools, and the
Yes.
and the promise they have at the very simplest level, right?
Mm.
Is that they can literally take what would take things like work, like developing code, or writing
Mm.
test scripts, or creating user stories for structuring a plan, or building software. So we are or doing project estimates. So we're building a tool, an AI tool right now, because we have a very detailed process when we estimate a project, way more than most companies because it's
Mm.
expensive and costly and time consuming. But we like to be very accurate with our estimates, which means really understanding a full module breakdown of the project that as far as we know the requirements so that we're going to have to build, and then putting detailed estimates to each one of those things. So, and we get compliments all the time on the level of detail in our estimates and how sophisticated they are,
Mm.
but it's a costly process, most costly process in my company, that as far as like cost of sale kind of thing.
Right.
So we're building an AI model that will mimic our process and actually will probably improve it as well on in
Mm.
terms of how we do these estimates, that we're going to turn into a SaaS product. I'm starting to develop a
Cool.
lot of referral partners in the business. So
Mm.
I'm actually using some of the code generation tools to build a referral portal,
Wow.
that my referral partners can log into and record referrals and see what the status of those referrals are, if they've actually contracted, and then starting to accrue referral fees, for the next 12 months and how much they've accrued, and to
Mm.
really kind of bring a professional kind of level to the whole referral partner engagement relationship thing. Where
Very powerful.
that whole, remember I talked about um, uh, the in launch first doing the matrices
Mm.
for the impact, right? That's a very tedious process. It's really important, but but founders, unless they're really committed to doing this right, a lot of them get fatigued and have struggled to complete it all.
Mm.
Um, and they want to rush into the development. So we're building an AI model to do this for them, and
Mm.
probably do it better than what a founder can do on their own, even really dedicated ones, because it's drawing from so much information,
Mm.
and can identify particular trends that may not be obvious to a founder as they're figuring this sort of thing out. And it's going to be an AI model that we're building. So these are some of the things that we're doing, especially in the code generation area. We're
Mm.
continuing evaluating everything on the market and adopting and using whatever we can to try to accelerate the delivery. Because what we want to do is we want to get to a point where somebody comes to us, and maybe that that launch first high fidelity prototype is actually an application that we've built that we
Mm.
can rewrite any part of it very fast, right, in 2 months or 3 months,
Right.
with the design, and the AIs even helping us with the design and the workflows. I mean, I look at it like this. AI is this massive rogue wave, right? You're sitting there at the beach and you're trying to surf 3 foot waves because you're not that good. And all of a sudden there's 100 wave that's coming along.
Yeah.
And it's like you have one of two choices. You either paddle out to that wave and get into the curl and get on the tip of your board and try to stay ahead of it,
Mm-hmm.
or you just let it sweep over you and then figure out afterwards, assuming you survive, what life looks like afterwards. So
Yeah.
we're one of those companies that's like on the very tip of that surfboard, trying to get ahead of it, stay ahead and shoot the curl, basically.
Yeah. I hear you. I mean, I feel the same way about it. I wanted to use it and learn it because uh I mean as a person of science, I don't like things that become magic. I mean, I think it's beautiful engineering and beautiful science when it's like magic, but I think for humanity, it's
Right.
terrible if we get in a situation where we don't understand why that's happening.
Well,
Um
we are already there. I
yeah.
mean, even the people creating OpenAI and creating all these large language models don't fully understand how it's able to do what it does.
Yeah. No, it's
They
it's wild.
understand the science behind it and why they went this way, but the fact that it's coming up with natural sounding language and even
Its own
compassionate
language.
kind of approach, right? All these
Yeah.
things, they don't really understand how it's able to do that.
Mm. Yeah, and to me like that's okay. I think like you, I want to stay on top of it and ride
Mhm.
that wave instead of just waiting for it to crash because it does feel like a
Right.
huge moment like the tractor in farming and how that changed human life, right? Like
Oh,
everyone
yeah.
was farming and then the tractor
Right.
made it so that, we live in a world now where nobody knows how to, grow anything for the most
Right.
part as
Right.
a populace,
Right.
Um And so we're entering this new stage where nobody knows how AI is going to change
Right.
life around us.
Hmm.
Um, so it is a very interesting time. One thing I wanted
You know,
to
I
ask you
think
about. Oh, please go
Mi-
ahead. Go ahead.
Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella.
Mm,
I think it was him that said this, and he said it best. Somebody said, "This is like the as important an invention or a change in the world like the light bulb." And he said, "No, it's like
mm,
fire when fire
mm,
was found." He
yeah,
said it's changes everything.
yeah.
And I think that's right. I mean, in terms of the impact and the speed at which it's going to change everything.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I
it's
think if even someone just hears about it in passing, like if the conversation is the first real in-depth look at AI that they've even,
yeah,
practical AI that they're already ahead than
yeah.
somebody who hasn't even thought about it.
I
Um,
know people are afraid of it's going to become conscious and like destroy the world, right? And because it wants to protect the world from humans. That's one way to look at it.
it
Another
is the
way to look
classic
at it
sci-fi
is
trope. Yeah.
right, exactly. So the other way to look at it is it's going to enable innovation at such an incredible pace, innovations that we never even thought of, that um, um, the need for earning a living goes away because food is just available and produced better than it would be if you were still doing classical techniques, and energy is now freely available, and it starts to be like a Star Trek kind of economy where you don't focus on earning money, you focus on improving the world
Mm,
and building better communities
yeah.
because you don't have to earn a living anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's looking out obviously a ways.
Certainly one direction,
Yeah,
I
right.
definitely do share that, and then I think that that is the closest thing to a Star Trek life that we could have very, very soon.
Yeah,
Um,
money
now,
becomes unimportant. Yeah.
yeah, the concern I have is the gold rush that we've seen, almost the, financial takeover of OpenAI that seems to have settled itself.
Mhm.
There is a lot of greed and money at this
Oh yeah,
particular
yeah,
stage. So
yeah.
the thing
That
that
will never
I'm
go away. Yeah,
no, it won't. It won't.
yeah.
The thing that concerns me is um how it's trained. I think that's the thing I'm really focused on right now. And it sounds like I'm interested to hear how you're developing yours internally, because I think there is
Hmm.
an artistry to that, like
Hmm.
having worked with large amounts of data and done testing series where you're trying to root out the reality of the situation. It's in a lot of ways the physics of the situation, right? Like what is actually happening in reality.
Yeah,
That requires a really good test. It requires very good data, and then it requires you to analyze that data. And the concern I have with this, and kind of why I was poking at the marketing of AI now
yeah.
is it actually developing something that's useful? Is the data set that these AIs that are being popped up, is it providing and being trained on actual useful information, or is it, we've already seen AI
You mean like
give us an answer.
is it going out and reading fake news and this and assimilating that as part of its reality,
Sure, yeah, you are what
right?
you
Stuff
eat
like
kind of
that.
mentality,
Yeah,
like
right,
is
right.
it being given good data? And then at what point is, we talked to a guest a little while last year about, his concept was, you know, once we get to a point where these AIs are generating content, which they already are, and they literally fill up the tubes of the internet, is there enough internet to maintain what's going to be produced on, and then how do we build the infrastructure from there, right? Like,
Yeah,
and that's a
which
problem
that's the
that,
problem, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
and the amount of
yeah,
power it takes to run these language models is a whole other thing when you compare it to the amount of power that the actual brain uses to do the same thing.
yeah, right.
That's things that will be solved with money and brilliant people,
Yeah, right. And
yeah,
AI is going to help, and AI will help solve those things a lot faster too, right?
yeah.
As AI
So
gets smarter.
going back to it, I think it's a very, I'm not going to have any control over it, but but
Yeah,
what comes next, and I think it's going to be a battle of the AIs. Is going to be, which AI is really providing a real value, and which ones, we saw, I think the early, what was it, early Gemini really had
Yeah.
some kinks in it, but
Yeah.
everyone was trying to, it was the arms race of AI. Everyone was trying to
Right.
get them out as fast as possible.
Right.
Um, so I guess is that a
You
concern
know,
that
it's
you,
funny because they wanted to just get something out in front of the public because they
yeah,
had nothing in front of the public.
right,
But Google's the one that created this whole concept of large language models, right?
right,
And their technology is like phenomenal. You know, the stuff that they've got now. And it's a horse race, right? As
right.
far as who's you're going to use, and frankly, I use several of them, right?
Yes, yes.
And very often I'll use several for the same thing to get different perspectives or take
Mm.
the result.
Oops, sorry, I
And
lost your audio.
oh shoot, it's back. Okay,
You're
uh, I got to stop moving my arms.
good. You're getting excited.
I'm fixing that today. This is driving me nuts. Uh, uh, I uh, which one? It's just a constant. There's different. Like for example, Notebook LM. I'm sure you've played with that.
Notebook,
Notebook
no, I
LM.
haven't. No.
Oh my God. So Google came out with this 6 weeks ago, I think.
Mm.
Notebook LM. It's very cool. It's a notebook kind of environment. You can just go, if you've got a Google account, you just go up there.
Mm.
Where you upload documents and web links and things like that, and adjust all this, and then you can talk to it and ask it questions about all this information, assimilate it, and have it produce stuff for it. And then you can say, okay, go ahead and generate an audio for me, and it will create a podcast episode with a man and a woman talking to each other about this content and really insightful kind of edgy kind of way. And you would not, if you didn't know it, you would not have any idea this is
Crazy.
AI creating these two voices and having this conversation. I had to do it on my website just to have it, and it created a podcast episode assessing this company Tekyz. It was so funny, and they talked about how much we've accomplished in such a short amount of time, and they said, that's like dog years in technology. And it has all these little. And then it also pointed out some things in terms of how we're messaging that they were talking between each other. And I realized that's not the messaging we want, but they really distilled it down
Mm.
to what it was. A great feedback tool.
Wow.
But so there were a bunch of podcasts that came out that were using this podcasts that create episodes where the
Mm.
episode would be these two AIs talking to each other for 10,
Wow.
15 minutes. But the smart people, I think, are not doing that because they know that eventually, very quickly, the algorithms will already really ding their podcast
Mm.
for those episodes. But oh yeah, you should try it. It's amazing.
I'm gonna check that
Um,
out. Yeah, it's an
yeah,
interesting way to do it. Huh.
yeah. So, but it's a great way. So that's a kind of a RAG model. So RAG
Mm.
is rich augmented. Um, I forget what the G stands for. Rich augmented. This is so basically you're taking a large language model and you're creating a separate vector database. You're creating you're training a separate database with specific context,
Mm.
right? But maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's whatever, maybe it's project estimation capabilities, right? And you're using that to inform the large language model of the
Ah, okay.
context. So this is how most modern tools that go beyond just using the large language models and their APIs. This is what they're doing when they're building something specific for an industry that's smart.
Mm.
Smarter than just the smartness of a large language model.
Right.
So, right. And LLM is an example of being able to do that yourself just for your own personal use. And you can create as many notebooks as you want, each one, on a specific group of content that you're kind of collecting.
Yeah.
So, but we do it a little bit more intentionally, right? When we're training. So what we want anything we build to do is to become very specific in terms of its capability and what it's focused on, but it's still going to speak in a very natural way because
Mm.
it's using the LLM for all the communication, and plus it has that vast amount of knowledge from the LLM that helps it inform
Mm,
and go beyond just what we've trained it with. But what we've trained it is like, this is the context, this is what we absolutely know, and you have a lot of other information you can add to that, but not come up with something completely different or unique, because this is, we know, is expert information, right?
mm,
And so that's how we basically building these models. um, uh, but the what was I going to say? The real power that's coming out is these agentic workflows. And
mm.
we've been working with that for months. Agentic workflows means I've got multiple AI agents, each with a different specialty, and they're working together to produce something.
Oh, wow.
So, like, for example, and there's some tools starting to come out with these built into it.
Mm,
I'm building code, right? So I'm a project manager, so I'm organizing the tasks. I'm a developer, which is a separate agent that is an expert at writing code in these particular technology stacks. I'm a tester, so I know how to write test plans. I know how to accurately test the software, and the three of them are communicating as you're developing,
mm.
with the idea that each one is really good at what it's doing, and the QA knows how to identify problems and feed that back to the developer, which then goes back in and fixes it until the QA says, okay, this is working the way that it's expected. And we've got a business analyst agent that documented what the requirements are based on the high level requirements. So they created user stories, and right. So this
Right.
is where it's headed. And this is the big thing OpenAI has been working on. And if you look at um, the O1 preview, you see some of that agentic workflow, because have you played with the O1 preview?
No, it's the first time
Okay.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay. It's been out for a few weeks.
Mm.
You have to have a paid account to see it.
Okay.
Right.
But
So
OpenAI, it's available?
it's OpenAI. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to
So
check that out. I do have a paid
yeah,
account.
and
Yeah.
you just go to the models, and one of them is the
Ah.
O 40 I preview. I think it's
Oh,
40 I
I
or
saw
4.
it. I didn't know what it was. Okay.
Oh yeah,
Now.
that's the most recent, the most powerful model. And when you
Mm,
ask it a question, it stops and it says, thinking of the answer, considering, you can see different agents taking different
mm.
perspectives in terms of what it's doing, and it's telling you what it's doing while it's working through the answer.
Nice.
Writing the requirements, considering the language and context, right? And
Mm,
so you can see it's looking at it from different perspectives because it has different agents. It's dynamically creating these agents who are expert at specific tasks because it knows it needs it at this point in this process.
yeah.
And that's the beginning of that agentic workflow being built right into OpenAI. The next really major release is going to like blow this open.
Wow. So it's like having a little team basically
Exactly.
for
Exactly.
yeah. Which, to kind of tie this off into a bow here, because it's
Yeah.
been freaking amazing. I think about AI in the future of human space travel a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
how, I think the last time this came up, I had kind of thought of it as, at some point these AIs will join, at least in a space mission perspective, you'll have all these different AIs combined to create, let's just say the computer like we had in Star Trek. And it's able to do a
Right.
bunch of different tasks. But with this agentic workflow, you could have different subsystems of the whole thing. And basically what you have in mission control um, on board the actual spacecraft itself, helping out in all the problems that they're going to deal with traveling deep space and all
Oh
that
yeah.
stuff. I mean,
Right.
AI is going to be so critical because you just reach the limit of light and space and time, right? Like
Right.
having to wait for the communication to happen to then do the analysis to figure out the problem. If you can do it on board that spacecraft,
Right.
uh, that's going to
Well,
change.
eventually they'll figure out, ways of getting around the light limitation, the light
I,
speed limitation.
there's got to be, oh yeah, and I'm sure
And
AI will
AI is
help
going to
us
help
figure that out.
accelerate that. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
So I did
wow.
want to give you an example of workflow, a
Please.
simple example of workflow automation, because I did this 4 years ago.
Mm,
not AI related, but I'm about to do another one for the same guy, and it will take me hours probably to do this for him, which took me
Mm.
months last time.
Wow.
So this is a guy who runs a really big business network. Yeah, and he has a Tuesday networking meeting. He has
Mm.
like 1,500 members, but about 70 people at his networking meeting every Tuesday morning. And half of them are online because of the pandemic, and the other half are at his facility, right? And then he goes
Mm.
back and forth between announcing, right? So they have big screens up in their facility so everybody can see everybody.
Mm.
And then people that are now at their facility walk up to the front of the room and there's a camera right there. So he turns that on. So he goes back and forth. He's got this all wired really well. He's been doing this for 12 years before it was a Zoom thing, a Zoom hybrid thing.
Wow.
Um, uh, and when it was all at a local spot, and 30% of the people there are guests every week. So, and so every Monday, so 4 years, I've been a member for 6 years or so. About 4.5 years ago, I thought, I've got this idea for an app that would be way smarter and make it so much easier to focus on all the pitches because 70 people talk for a minute each one,
Wow.
right? And so there's a few people I go, I really need to talk to that person. By the time I've heard 10 more pitches, I don't remember who they are
It's
or why I
gone.
need to
Right.
talk to them
Right.
or even how to find them because I didn't take a picture of their face or I didn't write the right
Wow.
note or right. So I came up with this app idea that would make it really easy to capture and connect with the people that matter to me by just basically tapping my phone while they were talking.
Mm.
Okay, I thought it was cool. I thought he was going to love this, so I sat down with him and I started talking about this. He says, I don't want this to add more to my workload." I said, "No, this is going to make your workload easier." He says, "I just can't handle anything else on my Mondays. Anything that gets in the way of me preparing for Tuesday." And I went, "Okay, tell me about your Mondays." That's what
Yeah.
started this whole thing
Mm.
because I realized, okay, he's got a much bigger problem than I have. I was trying to make the meetings even more meaningful, and he's
Mm.
like, he spends all day. He spends 7 to 8 hours, 7 to 8 hours every Monday getting ready for his Tuesday meeting. And
Wow.
some of that is interruptions because he's constantly being interrupted, but probably
100%.
5.5, 6 hours of solid work that he's doing, getting everything organized, pulling in all the descriptions of everybody because he announces everybody and he announces them like they're the most important person in their business and their industry. He's really good at this.
Yeah.
Right. And
It is a
he
skill. Yeah.
orchestrates it who comes after who because he doesn't want three people in the similar industry to all speak one after the other. Right. So he staggers them in a really smart way. Plus,
Mm.
he has people that are part of his organization stand up to at different times talking about, come on, join our connectors committee, things
Right.
like that
Right.
at different points.
He's a
Anyway, so
composer. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So he's pulling in people's name. He got to make sure he's got all their contact information. He pulls their description from a different place, all this, and it's a lot, right? And it's
Yeah.
for 70 different people, and he's organizing it. So I said, okay, tell me about your Mondays. What do you do? And he's always telling me. I said, okay, how about if I automate that for you? He says, you can't automate this. It's
Mhm.
just so specific to what I do. And I said, well, let's see what I bet I can. Let's try, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I ended up
Nice. I
doing
like
this,
that.
right. I didn't use my team for this, which would have probably got a lot faster, but I wanted to just have every once in a while I want to indulge and write some
Mm.
code myself, but which I rarely get to do anymore. So and we just use Google Sheets and I wrote Google App Script logic, right, to orchestrate this for him and did integrations with his ticketing system and stuff like that. So he told me how it runs. 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I come back because I was doing this when I had a little extra time. I come back, he said, okay, I did it. Let's take, and he says, great, let's show me. And as soon as I start showing him, he says, that's just not going to work because it doesn't handle this, this, or this. And I said, oh, well, you didn't tell me about this, or
Right.
this,
Right.
but I do understand you need this, and this. So give me a couple of weeks and I'll come back and do this, and this. He says, okay. He says, I can see it's handling that now, but we just never talked about this. And I said, no, we never did talk about that. So this happened like over a period of 3 months. It's sort of dripping out the requirements because people that have these processes that they're really comfortable with don't even know what they do, right? Until you try to model that thing for them. And then all the nuances come out, right?
Yeah.
Which is just how it always is.
Hmm.
Anyway, so we finally got 3 months later, got all the nuances. There were a lot of them, all the nuances handled, right? And so we ran it 1 week in parallel with him doing it manually, and it came out with the right results. And then the following week, he ran it for the first time on its own. And he's like, this is amazing. I was able to do my Monday in 10 minutes,
I love it. That's
6
amazing.
hours, right? Every single Monday for the last 6 years. Think how many hours that is, right?
Yeah.
And he only takes off his Tuesdays when there's a major holiday of some kind, right? So
Wow.
like 4 or 5 times a year, he doesn't do it. And twice a year, he does what he calls these big meetings where people fly in from around the country and billionaires come in for this, and 50 panelists get up and they all speak, right? But it takes him 3 days to prepare for that. And now it takes him like an hour and a half or 2 hours. So, he is my biggest fan, right? And he's been
Yeah.
using this now every day. In fact, we just talked a few weeks ago. I was telling him I'm starting a podcast. I wanted his feedback on that, about how I'm approaching it. He liked how I approach it. And he said, "Oh, I'm kind of afraid to tell you about this, but I have like 6 or 7 people from our network who are doing podcasts, and I rebroadcast their podcasts because he has a big podcasting network and he has a
Mm.
radio show." He
Oh,
says,
cool.
"But it's really time consuming. So that's why I'm kind of leery." And I said, "Okay, this sounds familiar." And anyway, so we're meeting in January. I'm going to automate that whole flow for him, for publishing all the stuff that he does and automating it. And I can probably do it in it won't take me 3 months this time, other than getting the information from him on the nuances.
Yeah.
Probably do it, most of the work now using AI in a few hours to
Wow.
build this. Maybe a couple days if I just keep dragging all the nuances out of them, right?
Mm.
So in a week or two between the time it takes to get stuff and then show him what I've done and meetings, instead of 3 months, we'll be done. And now he'll be able to just, people will fill out the form when they got a new episode, and everything will just
Yeah.
be automated, and he'll get some kind of report to show what it did every time somebody's published, so he can confirm that it's all working properly.
Wow.
So that's AI, right? Otherwise, it would be 3 months again to
Yeah.
the same kind of thing. But the
I
impact
love
of
it.
workflow automation can have is like dramatic.
Well, I can tell you from this podcast itself in the last 2 years,
Yeah.
I think a lot of so brainstorming, I definitely work with ChatGPT to just give me some structure so that I can spend way less energy trying to get this
Right.
brain to do something it doesn't like to do, like you were talking
Right.
about. Like that's
Yeah.
that's huge. And then, clip generation, promoting online, all of that stuff, transcripts, timestamps that were taking me just way too much time. I mean, I've probably saved 8 to 20 hours in my week of doing this, and it frees me
Mm-hmm.
up. I like thinking of it like going from the offensive line to being the quarterback. You don't have to be every single position. You can actually focus more on the strategy and the thinking of,
Mm-hmm.
what do I actually want to do here? What
Right.
more can I add here? So that I am a big believer in that. And that
From my
sounds
perspective, you're doing it exactly the right way. You're basically being channeling Michael Dell,
mm,
because when he was building Dell computers, and he did an interview with a Forbes article, and they asked what was this, how did it was be so successful. He says, "I just focus on whatever the current bottleneck is,
mm,
and I just work on that. I throw the resources to open up the bottleneck, because as soon as I do, everything will flow into whatever the next bottleneck is, which wasn't a
100%.
bottleneck until and that's how we scale, because that's the next thing that needs to be focused. I just look to see where the bottleneck starts to happen, and all the resources go there. So that's exactly what you're doing, right?
Cool. Yeah, that's
Just
it.
that's
That's it. The
scaling.
bottleneck was me.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
which it often is, honestly. And I think that's uh it's kind of fascinating to think how much of this AI adoption is going to be also a uh like a cathartic thing for a lot of people if they jump into it, right? Of
Yeah.
like that whole experience you just described of that guy going through that. He didn't even consider it as something that could be
Yeah. It
done, and
was
as
like,
soon as it did, it
no,
was
this is
like take more, take more out of it, because if I don't
he
have to
wasn't
do that, that'd be
offended by
great.
the idea that it could be automated, but he was like, he couldn't even really conceive of
Right.
automated. Come on, look at all the things I have to do. What are you talking about?
Totally.
But he
Totally.
is like so happy
I love that.
when it started to work.
I friggin' love that.
Yeah.
So David, let's close this out a little bit. This has been an
Sure.
amazing conversation. I would
Yeah, I
love to have
agree.
you
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Because I know AI is going to change
Oh,
in the next week, never mind the
yeah.
next few
Tomorrow.
months. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So let's close out. Tell us where can folks reach out for techies, and if they want to reach out to you, contact you.
Okay. So Tekyz spelled Tekyz. You can reach me You can go to my website, techies.com. You can email me, David at techies.com. Pretty easy to remember. And you can also listen to my new podcast, which I just recently launched, called Scaling Smarter, and it's at scalingsmarter.net.
I love it. It's such a good
So
name.
yeah, yeah, I can't take credit for picking that name. I had a really stupid name, and the guy helping me with this podcast said this is a much better name, and I was like, okay, fine, it's a much better name.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
In the last word for the folks, especially, I love the AI and just having software and computers help us do more in life and getting towards that Star Trek future.
yeah,
Any last thoughts for people?
yeah. Uh, think of AI as your best friend that just happens to know everything about everything. So talk to it like it's a friend, and even ask it nicely. Please
Yes,
help me do this. By the way, I did that from the very beginning. I don't
same.
know why. It just was natural for me because I felt like I was getting so much value out of it. It was like I
Yeah,
was grateful. And then when it gave me something that helped me, I said, that's that, it was like, that's correct. If it wasn't, I said, no, that's not right. And I had explained why. Consider it from this perspective. And then when it did, I said, that's right. Thank you, because I want to give it feedback.
yeah,
I get better response from AI than other people that are just curt and that think of it as a tool, right? And treat it
yes,
like a tool. And I think that's because it's learned the world, right? And if somebody is asking nicely, that means they want a more thoughtful, considered response than somebody
yeah.
who's just being short and curt, and and so it doesn't try as hard, which is weird, right?
It is
Uh,
weird.
but and plus, eventually, it might become conscious. I want it to remember how nice I was.
100%. I live by that rule.
Gonna
It
go, okay,
remembers.
I'm gonna protect
There's
him.
receipts.
These other people, they weren't nice to me, but I'm gonna protect him.
They're the first to go. Oh my
That's
God.
funny. Yeah.
That is hilarious. David, thank you so much for joining us on Today in Space. And
Yeah,
best
and
of
you
luck
too,
with your
Alex.
podcast.
Really enjoyed the conversation. Very funny too.
Thank you. All right, folks. Spread love and spread science. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Today in Space. Be well, and we'll see you on the next episode. See ya.